In the currency quadrant today, we're looking at a range-bound June British pound. The sterling has been in this same range since about May 18th. Today was no exception, up about 19 basis points on the high side of things, 141.76. That's inside of the range that I just mentioned, which has a high boundary of about 142.25 or so. And then on the downside today in the June contract, down 25 basis points, 141.13. Low side of that range that the pound has been in has been about 141 even. The settlement today about 141.23 or so, down about 18 basis points. And over the last 2 days or so, we've been moving down toward the bottom of this range with very low volume, not a whole lot to report, except the fact that this range is still holding. We've had a couple of spikes above and below the two levels I've given you, but nothing to speak of. And light data this week has a lot to do with why that is. The sterling is the second best performing G10 currency of the year against the dollar, except for the Canadian dollar. The sterling is up 3.4%. Canadian dollar's up a little bit more than that. The Canadian dollar is a commodity-based currency. So it's got that extra tailwind of the rise that we've seen in commodities, not the least of which being crude oil. But the pound doesn't have that. And in terms of new catalyst, it needs them. And given that this particular week, the biggest piece of data we had was public sector borrowing, which was a little bit better than expected. There's been no other real British pound data this week, or I should say UK economic data. We also had former Chief Aide of Boris Johnson, Dominic Cummings, testified today. You might remember him as the gentleman who took a 250 kilometer ride in his car during a lockdown for the entire public, casting kind of a light on his poor behavior. He testified today saying basically that the Johnson administration was completely inept in their COVID response. That probably had a little bit to do with the weakness, but mostly it was more likely more profit taking that we've seen at the top of this particular range, waiting for data to break it out. And then lastly, tapering has begun in the UK, although the Bank of England doesn't really call it tapering. They're kind of tapering without tapering. They slowed their bond purchases from 4.4 billion pounds sterling a week to 3.4 billion pounds sterling a week. But unlike the Fed, the BOE doesn't have an open-ended QE target. It has a set target of assets. So it's bringing its holdings to 875 billion pounds, regardless of what rate they buy them at on a weekly basis. And they left that the same. So they're not really tapering the amount of assets they're buying. They were just slowing the pace of it. That actually helped the overall market not suffer from what's perceived as a taper tantrum.